We're going to be performing read and insert operations. Then we're going to perform update and delete operations. And we're going to be using CRUD for this. So CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. We are going to switch our focus from modeling entities, which we've previously done in the playlist linked below the like button, the previous videos. So we're switching from modeling entities to working with data. JPA is going to make this simple, again, with using our CRUD. So in our employee.java, we haven't worked with this guy in a little bit. We're going to want to rename this, and we're just doing this for example purposes. We're going to rename our table to employee details. We do this with this at table. Now, if you haven't watched the other ones, we have this POM XML file with our properties and this entry part right here. We also have our dependencies listed right here, and then we have our closing part below it. In our XML file, we have the entities, or well, not entities, but we have this first part. We have these properties where we're just setting everything we're connecting to our MySQL, and then we have this down here. And we will be using MySQL as well. So in our employee, all we're doing right here is making the table name, and we should have a toString method that's new, and we can just auto-generate this. Now, that's going to be all. Let's go into our app. Inside of our app, we're going to change some things. We're going to see how to make instances of employees. We're going to persist them to the database, then retrieve them from our database. We're going to be using the employee class and not the employee entry. So we've previously worked with employee entry ID and employee entry. These are different. I'm not working with them right here. So inside of our app, we can see that we are going to still have our factory. We are still going to have our entity manager. And now in our try, we are going to make these employees right here. So we have first employee, where we pass in name, last name, manager, and salary. And then we're going to do this again for the second employee, but it's going to be different. Remember that the ID is going to be auto-generated for us. And then we have our third employee. We're going to have these persists, which basically saves them to our database. So we pass in our first, and we're going to have our second and our third employees passed in. Now, let's say we want to retrieve the employees. We're just going to do it for two of them. So we have our employee. It's going to be called emp1, emp2, and then we're just going to print these out. So with this, we are going to have to find inside of our class right here. Let's go through this one by one. We have our employee, so it's of type employee, emp1, and then it's equal to our entity manager dot find. So inside of our entity manager, which is basically the factory, we are going to find our employee class, and we're also going to have of 1. So we are going to be using the employee class, and we want our ID, what identifies everything. The ID is going to be 1, and then we want ID, the next one, so that's going to be 2. So that's how we would get each of these employees. If we wanted a third one, we would just do the same thing, rename this, and have the ID be 3, and then we could just print this out here. So if we do that, and I'm going to comment this out because we're actually going to come back to it in a second. Our catch and finally is going to remain the same. We can run this, and in running this, you're going to get the following, all of this right here. So it's going to look pretty similar, but it's also going to look pretty different. So we're dropping the table, dropping the table, dropping the table, dropping the table. We're creating our tables, and then we're going to be inserting. We can see that we have our hibernate, where we update, we set, and then we do our selecting if we have anything that we want to select here. And then we could see that we print out our details right here. So that's going to happen right here. We have our sysout.println, that's going to print out, and then after we print, we are going to go and put these into our database. We can see our inserts here. Well, what if we want to actually list things? Well, to list things, we are going to do what I just commented out. We have our list, it's of type employee, and we're just calling this employee list, and it's set equal to our entity manager dot create query. Now, this language is similar to SQL. Notice how even though we rename our employee inside of here, we're going to reference to it by the entity, not its database name, which is employee details, which we renamed it to be. We're going to set an alias for all employee instances. This is going to be our ED. This replaces the star and select since we only want to get the ED. So we have our select ED. We're selecting all of our basically employees, which are called ED, from our employee ED. If you've taken like a SQL or anything, we're basically selecting everything that is of ed from our employee as ed. I believe you can write it like this too, and it will still work. And then we have our .get results. And then to iterate through this, we have this for each loop right here. Now, before we run this, let's actually look at our employee right here. Now remember, it's not employee, it's employee details. So let's come in and duplicate this line. We'll do details. I don't think the casing matters because it's MySQL. We can run this and we can see that we have everyone inside of here like this. Now, what if we want to list it like this? Well, we can run it by going like this. If we expand it, we can see that we still have our selects right here. We have our hibernate. We are selecting these employees. We have our ID, we have our first name, we have our job, we have our last name, and we have our salary. And then this is from our employee details. So that is important to note. So employee details, we can see that we have this details up here, and then we have this listing right here. So it's going to give us a list of everything right here that we have. Now, if we go back into our MySQL, we can run this again, and it's still going to be the same values. And the reason why it's the same values is because we haven't changed anything. We're just listing it. So when we have our CRUD, which is the create, read, update, and delete, we have created, we are now reading. Next, we're going to be performing update and deleting operations. Now we're going to update employee details. This is pretty simple. It's pretty easy. So we know we have our employees that we made right here. And after we do our persist, we're basically saving these to our database. Now, after we do this persist, we can get these employees. So we have type employee. We're just going to store this in emp2. And then we're going to use our entity manager .find because it stores it inside of here. And then we're going to push in here the employee.class, and we're also going to pass in the ID, and the ID is auto-generated for us. We know that from in here because we have generated value. So we're going to have our employee.class, and then we have the second one, so that's going to be Sam Thomas, a video editor. Now let's update our employees details. Let's do our emp.to, and we're going to use the set job. So we use these setters inside of our employee.java. And we set that as a senior editor. We can also set the salary, and then we can do this persist. And this persist is just going to save it into our database. So if we look at our MySQL, just like this, we have Peter, Sam, Michelle, and notice how Peter is employee number 2. He's a video editor. Once we run this, go run app.main, and we go back to our MySQL workbench, we can rerun this, and we're going to see that it is not a video editor, and he is a senior editor with a bigger salary. So it's going to look something like this. We have our notes right here where drop if table exists, drop if table exists, drop if table exists, drop if table exists, create department, which we're not using here, create employee details, which we are using, and then entry, which we are not using. We have our hibernate sequence, and then next we are going to have our hibernate select from, and this is for an update. We have our updates, and this is going to be, I believe this is where we're updating our specific part. Then we're going to have our hibernate inserts. So this is actually, since this back here, this update is after this. Now, even though these say select an update, I don't think this is exactly updating yet, because our update is down here, and we haven't even gotten to our inserts yet. And our inserts are going to be like right here, where we insert it into our database. So we should go down here a little bit more. We have our insert, insert, and now we come to our update. And we can see that our first name, job, last name, and salary are all updatable. Where our ID, so we're going to set these, and this is going to correspond to our ID. So that is how we're going to do our update. Now, what if we want to do our delete? A delete is super simple. Let's comment this out, and let's actually duplicate it. And instead, we're going to have sysout.println, and we'll do deleting an employee's details. This should have had a apostrophe too. So instead of this set job, all of this stuff, we'll keep our persist because we're going to want to save our changes. Now inside of here, what we're going to want to do is our entity manager dot, we can do a remove. We can pass in an object which we want to remove, which will be our emp2. So now we can run this again, and then we're going to pull up our MySQL workbench, and then we can run this, and we're going to see that we no longer have Sam. Oh shoot, okay, we still have Sam. And the reason why we still have Sam is because of overconfidence. We can see that we persist this emp2 right here, but we're persisting this into our database, right? We don't want this anymore. We just want this removal. So we have entity manager.remove. We don't want to pass this in, it doesn't really matter. What we are going to want to pass in is our second employee. We just straight pass this in right here. So we're going to remove this, and let's try running it again. So after we run it again, we can try to run our employee details. We can see that we no longer have our number 2, which is going to be Sam. So Sam is gone because we removed him. We don't need to save it with this persist, and we don't need to have a emp2 right here. We can comment this out if we wanted to. So let's go into our output. It's going to look very similar. I'm just going to go straight to the delete part. So we can see deleting employees details, and then we have our insert, 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 where we insert everything, and then we have our delete. It's from employee details, where we have our ID. So this is the important part right there. And that's going to be how we do our updates. We are going to do our delete, and earlier on we did our read and insert operations.